thank you for joining me, because the Secretary of State is not only pointing the finger at the fact that there's no executive, he's pointing the finger at you, and he's saying that you should have done more. What's your response to what he had to say yesterday?
Well, first of all, it's nonsense. And let's go through the timeline on this. Back on the 26th of May, the then Chancellor, now Prime Minister, announced that this would be a scheme that would be put in place across the whole of the United Kingdom. We had a very good meeting with Nadhim Zahawi, the then Chancellor, in August time, who I have to say worked hard and worked with us to ensure that this payment could be made as soon as possible. And a very simple mechanism was put in place whereby this £400 would be credited to people's electricity accounts in Northern Ireland. Some work had to take place in order for that to happen, but the energy companies, the utility regulator, all worked very hard, and those systems were in place in October time to give this payment. All they needed was the go-ahead from the business department in Whitehall, and weeks and weeks and weeks went by. That was never given. And in the last few weeks, they've now said, we don't want to credit this to electricity bills anymore. What we want to do is give people the option to take that money in the form of a voucher, cash it in and spend it on whatever you want. And this is adding weeks and weeks and weeks of delay. Whether an executive were in place wouldn't have made a difference. This funding was available in Scotland, it was available in Wales, even though they have their own devolved administration. So it's nonsense to try and shift the blame onto me, onto my party, or onto the Northern Ireland institutions at this time, because they agreed the system that was to be put in place, and they haven't delivered on it.
Yeah, Gordon, and it seems a little strange to me that they would change at such a late stage to say that they will set up a separate scheme whereby people can cash in a voucher, because you and I both know that when you start a new scheme like that, it takes weeks and weeks to put in the mechanisms and the safeguards to make sure that it's delivered properly. Do you think, and I take it from what you've been saying, that you think there's more behind this? Do you think it's a political tool to try and force the DUP back into the executive?
Well, look, you're absolutely right. And when we had these initial meetings back in August time, we settled on this credit to electricity bills because we wanted the money delivered as quickly as possible. The idea of a voucher scheme was considered at that time, but it was very quickly dismissed because it would have been different to what was happening in the rest of the UK, and it would have delayed it far longer. So we get to the point where we're in October time and things are ready to go, and all of a sudden they change their mind. All of a sudden they say they want a different scheme. So I think it's reasonable to assume that there must be political reasons behind this, that in some way they're trying to use this scheme, this payment, this lack of payment, in order to put pressure on the DUP. Of course, it's not the first time that the Northern Ireland office or successive Secretary of States have tried to do things like this. The Secretary of State promised that he would call an election multiple times, and then that didn't happen. He said that he was going to cut MLA's pay, I think in an attempt to try and force parties back into government. That wasn't going to work. And now we have all of this nonsense around the energy payment scheme. It's time for this government to get on with it, to get on with what was agreed, and